It's time for Southeastern Rewind's Tell Me More. What's up, y'all? I'm David Sommers with the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller, answering 5 questions from the latest Studcast, now on Ron's new home on YouTube. The 5 questions on this edition of Tell Me More come from Studcast episode number 14. That episode is called I'm the Real Tennessee Stud. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. Hey, it's really happening, Southeastern Rewind. It's blowing up, stud. I say it every week because it's getting bigger every week. No doubt about it. What's going on, man?
Oh, nothing, man. Just enjoying it. A beautiful day here in the old Smoky Mountains. And I'm ready to do another Tell Me More, man. I'm hoping our questions are going to be good and looking forward to it. And as you say, man, the Southeastern Rewind is really blowing up. And wow, we've gone up way past that 1,000 subscribers at this point, headed toward 2,000 hours. And, and when we reach 4,000 hours, we will be probably at that point, I think they consider us a pretty big time channel there.
Awesome.
So we're working our way that direction, and so much good stuff still coming. We're going to be going this weekend and going back and taking a good look on Sunday. Myself and Les Thatcher are going to do a rewind review of that Southeastern television show from 1978 that we debuted last Sunday. So
yeah,
we've got a whole lot of things for fans going up every day, and really appreciate everybody. Got to thank everybody for subscribing and tell your friends about us, because we're getting ready to take off here, man. I really believe a week from Sunday, Dave, we're going to have the first USA television program ever produced on, me and Gordon Soley.
Oh, sweet. That's absolutely awesome. And listen, the one you've been talking about from 1978 is already over 2,000 views. So folks have gravitated to that immediately, and that's what they're waiting for on YouTube and on Southeastern. So you got to check it out. And again, maybe only, as you said, only a couple of weeks away?
Couple of weeks away,
wow.
Maybe less, maybe only about 10 days away from actually having the first USA television wrestling program ever produced in 1988 on, and we'll have 25 in a row there of those.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, and listen, make sure that you stay tuned to this particular show, which is called the Southeastern Tell Me More, and the Studcast and the Super Studcast, to find out more about what's happening on Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. And this is Friday, August 6th. So let's mention really quickly that we lost a couple of really good ones in the last week, and we're going to be doing a special Super Studcast that you'll have an opportunity to hear within the next few days. And it's one of those famous tributes, Stud, that you've really become famous for.
Yeah, and this one I'm planning on doing. I was going to do it on 2, but we had another pretty famous wrestler and promoter that died just recently. I think maybe the same day as Bobby Eaton, and that is Prentice. He's a very famous dude, and I think we're going to try to go ahead and talk about all 3 of them, because the 3 guys went in this last week, and wow, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to do the tributes to them, but at the same time, I really feel good about it. I think every one of them deserve to be recognized when they go.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so here we are. It's the Tell Me More, again, for episode number 14. Stud, you ready for 5 questions?
Heck yes, man.
Let's do it. All right, here we go. Barbara Patterson says, question number 1, did you ever wrestle your brother for the rights to the Tennessee Stud brand?
Well, man, I guess everybody's aware of the little battles that Rob and I had, and discussions. Maybe not battles is the proper word, but the disputes we had over who was the real stud. And that being the name of this particular episode, number 14, this is a good question to start it off with. What really happened here is never until I got out of wrestling and into hockey in 1989. I got into hockey, got out of wrestling in 1988. And when I did, I thought I was totally through with wrestling. And I was for many, many years. I was gone for, more than 30 years, around 30 years before I ever tried to make a comeback, which I have managed to do somehow. And thanks to everybody out there, I have made a comeback. And I gave my wrestling jackets to my brother in 1988, my long robes. I gave him, and I gave him my blessing to use the name, the Tennessee Stud, that he could have the name of the Tennessee Stud. I never anticipated ever coming back to get involved in wrestling again. A lot of stuff was going on in wrestling, and big company up north was taking over for everybody. So I said, geez, it's a good time to get out. And, and at this time in 1988, my brother was not only wrestling for David Woods, that's the guy that bought all of us out. The 5 of us that were partners in the Continental and Southeastern. David Woods, he owned a television station in Montgomery, Alabama. His father owned a television station in Dothan, Alabama, and several other cities. And Rob was booking for him when I left in 1988. And then I started my own USA Wrestling Company. When I left Continental, and I went to Knoxville, moved back to Knoxville, started my own USA Wrestling Company. We did 25 episodes there. And then I sold that company to David Woods, the same guy. So, and I'd been a babyface in Continental since probably about 1985. And all the way up to 88. And when I got on USA, I was still a baby face, obviously, because Continental Wrestling went back into Knoxville. So they were seeing me as a baby face for about 2 years, wrestling guys like the headhunters with the crazy Kevin Sullivan managing them, and a whole lot of other different people in those last couple of years that I was wrestling.
Yeah.
And then Rob and Jimmy, they went back. They had been baby faces along with me, but when they sold out, and they kind of went back to being heels again for David Woods with his new company, his new Continental company. He had bought the company. And then Rob even created his own stud stable. Several heels were in his stud stable. Mick Foley was one of them, I believe. So is Cactus Jack. So a lot was going on back in those days. And so Rob got in touch with me, and I'd tried to disappear. I'd tried to leave them alone. Didn't want to bother them at all. Didn't know that I would adversely affect them, but I didn't feel like I should be going to their matches. And then Rob got in touch with me, and he says, me and Jimmy have been thinking about it, and we'd like to work a little angle with you, Ron. So we talked about it a little bit. So I went down and showed up. They were making TV in Knoxville. And I can't remember who their comment might have been. Ronnie West was their commentator at this point. I know that Charlie Platt did some stuff, but that was mostly produced out of Birmingham. This particular show was produced out of Knoxville. And I went out and sat down to do a little commentary on one match on that program. And out of nowhere, Rob and Jimmy show up. And they start to me about, you're not a wrestler anymore. And what are you doing out here, Ron? You got no business being here. And, and you're goody two shoes, and the fans all cheering for you. And, we got into a little altercation there. And then that altercation got a little wilder and wilder. And then finally, both of them kind of jumped me. And I had a nice sport coat on, and dressed pretty nicely, and they tore my coat off, and they kind of put the boots to me. And so once I got up and I started to fight back, they ran, and when they did, they took off, and the typical of the old Rob is the Tennessee stud. He was pretty good at that, and so I got on the microphone and said, I haven't wrestled in a year, and which is true. I'd only had one match in the last probably 18 months at that point, and I said. I'm not in real good shape, but I said, there seems to be a big problem here about who was the real Tennessee stud, and I think everybody out there knows who it is. The boy got a big cheer, and I'm sure Rob didn't like that sitting in the back. So anyway, I said, I think it's about time that we really prove who's the real Tennessee stud. I said, so I'm going to challenge my brother the next week, come here to Knoxville, and we're going to wrestle for the title.
Wow.
And, the Tennessee stud title, basically.
So was that in the Knoxville Coliseum?
It was in the Knoxville Coliseum. Yes. And it was. And so the next week when we went there to wrestle, the Knoxville Coliseum was sold out. And it was the last sellout ever for David Woods' Continental Wrestling in Knoxville. Last sellout ever in the Coliseum. I think Jim Cornette might have accomplished it a couple of times with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but that's going to be 4 or 5 years later before that happens.
Wow.
So it was the end of big time wrestling, that event where I wrestled Rob to find out who was going to be the real Tennessee stud.
Were you possibly channeling Al Pacino from The Godfather 3, where he said, I'm trying to get out, and they keep pulling me back in?
That's pretty good. Yeah, and that's pretty close to what it was, actually, I was out. I just paying a little visit, man. I just dropped by to say hello. And wow, it got kind of wild and crazy, and I ended up getting back into the ring one more time. And and then what's the crazy thing about it, Dave, is I think the ring ended up with full of wrestlers.
I was going to ask, surely you got to give us the outcome on this.
Yeah, the ring ended up full of wrestlers. They had, I got Rob going, and obviously Jimmy came, and then, I kind of got Rob and Jimmy going, and somebody else in their stable came, and then a couple of guys started coming to help me, and a few more came to help Rob, and finally, obviously they just rang the bell, and they just the match was no contest, and so there was never really a bona fide winner of the who is the real Tennessee stud match.
So he kept the moniker anyway.
Yeah, he kept going at it. Then I was just pretty close. To making the deal to get my first hockey team at that point. I didn't care at that point. I just said, man, I'm kind of sorry I went down there and did the deal. But at the same time, the wolf was at the door. That's a good way, I guess, of putting it, Les. And I'm talking about Vince McMahon Jr. The wolf was at everybody's door, man, if you were in the wrestling business back in those days. And I could see it. A lot of others didn't see it. They stayed in it, but nobody lasted probably more than 2 years after that. All of them were closed. All the territories were gone.
You could see you obviously could see the writing on the wall at the time.
I kind of felt like I could see the writing on the wall, yes. Yeah. And the wonderful thing about it for me is, hockey I think I made more money in hockey in 5 years than I made in wrestling in 17.
Wow. Yeah. And that's where it was kind of a revolutionary thing, the stuff that you did in hockey, which is a whole nother story for another time. But you did some amazing things in hockey that absolutely changed the game. All right.
Yeah, so, my partner and I, my two partners and I, we lit up hockey, man. We lit up minor league hockey, and what we did eventually was picked up by everywhere. All the big time. The entire NHL ended up doing exactly the things that we started doing that made hockey so popular at the minor league level.
Oh, no doubt. All right. Question number 2 comes from Mark Cole. He said, Did Iron Mike DiBiase work for Buddy when he ran Arizona? If so, did you know young Ted back then? I think he's 5 or 6 years younger than Ron. That's Mark's question.
Yeah, and Mark's a great guy. Mark's a real historian here, man, and you know he's dug back here, and yes, Mike DiBiase was Ted DiBiase's dad. He was a tremendous wrestler, a great worker. He was extremely believable in the ring. You know, and Ted DiBiase is such a great wrestler, but for fans that never saw the two, that can't compare, I honestly believe his father was even better. And Mike was the Arizona heavyweight champion. And I never got to meet Ted because my dad was a baby face, and Ted's dad, Mike, was a heel. And it was a kayfabe business back in those days. You didn't get together and bring your families and meet one another. You know, you were a baby face. You just hung out with baby faces, and you never hung out with heels. Never got seen anywhere with them. Mm-hmm. So I never got to meet Ted during that time. And then since he was 5 or 6 younger, I was a freshman in high school. The second trip we made to Arizona, we went there twice. So the second time we went, I was 15 years old, and he must have been only about 9 or 10. So, but I would have still liked to meet him, and we would probably have been great friends. You know, wrestlers' sons had so much in common because we were in a different sport than anybody else on earth. And, you know, and it wasn't always easy to be a wrestler's son. You really had to learn to be a pretty tough kid pretty early, or you were going to have a rough time of it.
How would you know?
Yeah. You know, yeah. I experienced a whole lot of that, man. Starting in early on, about the third or fourth grade. From then on, you know, it was, well, your daddy's a wrestler. Yeah. He's tough. How about you, right? You know, so and I got a lot of funny stories, obviously, about my dad teaching me how to be tough, man, to take care of myself at an early age. But we won't go into that now. They're going to be hearing about that on Studcast anyway. So I never got to meet Ted, you know. But Ted and Robert were actually tag team partners in Georgia, and I believe it's 1983 probably. The Freebirds were there in Georgia at that time, and Rob was actually the booker for Georgia Championship Wrestling for Jim Barnett, and doing a pretty good job of it. You know, Ted and Rob were a great tag team together, and they had tremendous feud with the Freebirds. It lasted for months and months. I didn't get to see the Georgia TV, but Rob and I talked quite a bit, and he was telling me what was going on. So I had some idea what was happening. Then I never met Ted until about 1984, a year after Rob and him were partners. Rob had come back to Southeastern. We were just about to turn it into Continental, but it was still named Southeastern. And Ted was looking for a territory. And he got in touch with me, and I said, come and see me, Ted. Let's sit down and talk. And we went out on my pool in Gulf Breeze. It was in a real nice Tiger Point. It was a real nice subdivision. They had a pretty decent house, a nice pool, and it was right on the golf course, set right behind the house. And Ted and I must have sat out there for 3 hours, talked about being a boy and his experience in Arizona, just like mine when my dad was there. And we talked about him coming to Continental. Southeastern it was, I'm pretty sure, but within the next year it's going to be Continental. And so great conversation. But Ted obviously was destined to be a star, and I think pretty quickly in that same time frame, he must have got his offer from Vince Jr. It was Vince Sr. back in those days. Jr. wasn't even there, you know, but Sr. back in those days, you know, brought Ted in. he went on to become the $1 Million Man, and probably did great. So, but I was really impressed with him. I was always impressed with him as a wrestler. I loved his work in the ring, but I was really impressed with him in that 3 hours we spent together. And I don't think I ever saw him again face to face after that conversation.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. All right. So, and here we go to question number 3. Jose Lopez says, when Buddy was running Arizona, did he cover the entire state or just near Tucson? Did he cross into neighboring states like his previous territories did?
Well, wow. What a good question, Jose. When you get out west, Dave, distance is just dramatically increased between major cities. We're used to in the South, it's not far from Atlanta to Tampa, and it's not far from New Orleans over to Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
It's not far from Knoxville south to Panama City. But when you get out in west, man, in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, wow, for sure. It's just spread out. So your cities are much further apart. So Dad did run, yes, Jose, Dad did run the entire state of Arizona, top to bottom, all the way from Flagstaff south to Nogales, which was way down there. He ran Tucson every week. He ran Phoenix every week. I think on Saturday night he ran Nogales, and it was back in the time when he was building these buildings. He had been doing that for a while. He's going to do it in Georgia. He's going to do it in Florida when he's involved with Eddie. The wrestling company is going to build their own buildings. He did it in Nogales, Arizona, because they needed a Saturday night town, and he wanted to have the concessions. He wanted to have all the income from it. So yes, Jose, he ran everything in Arizona. And I believe he probably ran a few towns over across the border into New Mexico, because 2 major cities in Arizona had TV markets, Tucson and Phoenix. And those had big signals. Obviously, the TV stations had stronger signals than what we had in the South, because you had so much more area to cover. And those station signals would bleed over into New Mexico. And I think Dad ran some towns in New Mexico. But about 1963, when we were getting ready to leave and go back home to the Mississippi farm, Dad was eyeing, though, Salt Lake City in Utah. And he was eyeing Utah. If we had stayed, he was setting the groundwork to move Phoenix territory all the way from basically the border, the United States border in Arizona, north of Utah. He was going to encompass Utah because Utah didn't even have any wrestling at this point. And he was already working on getting a television station in Salt Lake City, and he would have expanded that there, and who knows what would have happened at that point. Might have never gone back to farming again. Jose, Dad ran the whole state, and God, he had some great workers, man. He had wonderful workers. Jose Lothario was a top baby face with Dad, and wow, Jose Lothario he trained
Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
I mean, Jose, and a lot of other wrestlers too.
Yeah.
Not just trained guys, but taught guys. They learned so much just watching Jose Lothario wrestle. He was a tremendous Mexican star, and so they were full. And obviously, you got the Mike DiBiase and great heels, Sputnik Monroe. We've been doing a talk about Sputnik. He went to Arizona. He's part of that team. Don Fargo, and I think it was Jack Dalton went there as well. And they were a tremendous team, man. Wow, what a gimmick they had. They would dress up like cowboys, and they would come into the ring, and they would have the holsters. They wear 6 guns with holsters, 45s, and they would load those 45s with blanks. And when they would introduce their name, they would draw those 45s and they would blast off all 6 shots.
Oh my God.
I mean, talk about an intro, man.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in the building was freaked out, you know, and they didn't just do it real slow, like one at a time. Don Fargo was really great with a gun.
Yeah.
And he would hold the trigger on a 45 and he would take his hand and he'd start with his thumb, and he'd pull the hammer back with his thumb. It would fire a shell. His first finger, second finger, third finger, next finger, blah!
Yeah.
It'd be like 6 almost at once.
Wow.
You know, and so it was great for Arizona. I mean, it really fit in well with that territory. A lot of great things Dad was doing back in those days. And, you know, as always, he was really ahead of his time.
Scare the hell out of the audience and make them crap themselves. Where was I?
Yeah.
Question number 4. Jonathan Bickers says, why did Buddy pick a remote town in Mississippi to farm? He could have moved you and the family anywhere. So why Mississippi? I think we all share that sentiment. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, and Jonathan, there's a great questions this week, man.
I'm kidding.
Jonathan,
by the way, I'm kidding, Mississippi. It's okay. It's okay. I'm in Alabama.
I mean, Mississippi is not a very populated state, and you know it has a reputation as being, you know, not the. It's not New York. It's not big time to live in Mississippi. But my dad was a pretty smart guy, you know, and so once he decided he was going to farm, he decided where he wanted to farm, and you know, the Mississippi River is anybody that's ever crossed the Mississippi River, they never forget it because there's no river like it. It's just massive. It's huge and wide, and you know, it's an experience. And I remember the first time I ever crossed the Mississippi River as a kid, you had to go on a ferry boat. They would you drive your car onto the ferry, and then they would take the 10, 12, 15, 20 cars across the river and drop you on the other side.
Yeah, because it's a mile across, and they didn't have very many bridges that would reach that.
No, you didn't have bridges back in the the 50s. You didn't have a lot of big bridges across. There was a bridge in Memphis. There was a bridge in St. Louis. I don't know that there was a bridge between St. Louis and Memphis.
Probably not. And then south of there could have New Orleans or Baton Rouge. That would have been about it. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got this monster river, okay? And the Mississippi River didn't have big banks. You know, it just was a strange river. It's like then the land was very low, right next to the river, not just for a mile in or 2 miles away from the river. It was low, sometimes 30 miles from the river. On either side of the river, you know, and when that river flooded, it flooded and all that silt and all that mud. It's a dirty, nasty looking river anyway. It's filled up with, you know, people that have never seen it. It's an experience to see this river for yourself, you know, and all that silt and all that dirt and all that tremendous topsoil that had washed away from somewhere else north of there would flow over into the land, especially in Mississippi when you got that far south on the river, and then when the floods receded, that land was so dark and it was so good for growing crops. It was like he handpicked an area. Potts Camp, Mississippi is where we lived. And it was probably about 50 miles outside of Memphis, maybe 30 miles away from the river as the river flowed that direction. And it just was tremendous land. And he had enough money to buy 2,000 acres. So we didn't farm, Dave, like little guys that have, you know, an acre of corn and an acre of this, and an acre of that. We had hundreds of acres of cotton and hundreds of acres of corn. And, you know, we had cows, we had horses, we had pigs, we had chickens, we had, it was like, wow, we were big time farmers, and that's why Jonathan, he picked a little town in Mississippi, is because the land was so good that whatever we grew, it grew so massively. You're gonna believe it. You probably won't believe this, Dave, but we grew corn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one of the things we grew was corn, and I was in high school. I was in the ninth grade. I was about 6'3", and I remember our corn was so tall that you could not reach the lowest ear of corn.
Holy cow!
Think about that. 10 feet, 11
Wow.
feet.
Good God.
Massive, huge corn.
Yeah.
Stalks the size of 4 inches thick. I mean, just tremendous corn. And so, cotton. The cotton, honestly, was higher than my head.
Good God.
And people in your part of the country, down there where you live,
Yeah.
I see the cotton down there, and it's 2-3 feet high.
Maybe
right?
knee high. I mean, knee high, I mean, that's about it. Usually.
That's it.
Yeah.
Imagine 3 times that high.
Was your daddy shooting steroids into the cotton in the corn?
I mean, the steroids was there. The Mississippi River provided the steroids.
Yeah,
it had been doing this for centuries and thousands of years, and the steroids was in the soil.
Yeah.
And that's what made it all happen. So yeah, we were big time farmers, and we were really taking a lot of produce to the market, man, big time. And then there's the reason for this, Jonathan. Oddly enough, Dad kind of got back into wrestling a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have a territory. He had already lost Memphis. They had stolen it from him, basically.
Yeah.
But he went back and started working for Roy and Nick. He kind of settled this dispute over Memphis, and he went back and started working for them in Memphis and the towns around Memphis. So my dad was a farmer in the day and a wrestler at night.
That's wild.
Crazy. Now he was one of the hardest working guys I ever saw, man. And he would start at 5 in the morning, and he wouldn't get home and go to bed until 2 at night, 2 in the morning.
Yeah, that's incredible. And farming is a huge responsibility. Always something to do. And the same thing for wrestling. So because you got some high maintenance wrestlers out there to deal with. But you were talking about the width of the Mississippi. Some of that Delta area had to be where he was. You were saying spread out 60 miles either side and that kind of thing. So, and then did you ever step out into the night air on Canal Street in New Orleans and take a big whiff of the old muddy? It's a stinky river, but anyway.
Oh yeah. It's not there's nothing beautiful about the Mississippi. The smell, the look, nothing is beautiful about it except the size of it. It's absolutely massive son of a gun that and that's what the allure is of that river, I think. I would have liked to have been an old riverboat captain, man.
That would be
running
cool.
the river boats back in the 1800s down that river and dealing with all those sandbars and, wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Jonathan, hey, thank you, man. You took me back here. This has been a great question. I've enjoyed this little journey back, man.
All right, good times. Good job, and thank you, Jonathan. All right, so question number 5 comes from Larry Maddox. Larry Maddox says, you mentioned that Buddy had a hard time getting the Arizona territory going. Did Buddy or you ever have to don a mask to fill a match slot because wrestlers either no-showed or had broken down trying to make it to the town?
Well, that's a good question, Larry, but I'll finish with my first thought here, man, about whether we had to don a mask. But Larry, it's kind of always been a standard in the wrestling business. Maybe it goes all the way back to my grandfather, probably, no doubt, his time or even the 20s. Is if somebody didn't show up to a town, then whoever was on that card, if it was a baby face that didn't show up, one of the baby faces on that card took his place. He worked twice, in other words. that was the normal scenario. If a heel didn't show up, then you had 2 heels on the card. If you had 4 heels on the card, one guy was picked to do the match. Usually that was given to the guy that chose to do it. Which means, the promoter would come in and he would say, we're short. So-and-so didn't make it. His car broke, or, he just didn't make it. And who wants to take his place? Well, before I get to that, there was a standard procedure also, is whatever your pay was, and if you took that extra match, you got an additional half of what your pay was for the first match that you had.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right. So if you made, let's say, $100 in the first match, if you took that shot and then you took that extra match, you got 50 more.
150. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So I always wanted to work those matches, which, because I was, Dad never supported me in Rob. I mean, Dad never sent us money. You could. I never called Dad and said, "Hey, Dad, I ain't got enough money to make the town." God, I usually I guess I didn't do it because I knew he would say, "Well, too bad for you. I guess you're going to miss the show."
Yeah.
He wouldn't have done it, and I never wanted to put him in that position.
Right.
But I always wanted to make the extra money. But even more than making the extra money, Larry, I think this was Larry's name. Even more than making the extra money was the chance to work twice in one night.
Exposure, yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the exposure of it, Dave. It was the learning process. You had to spend hours, thousands and thousands of hours in the ring to become a great wrestler. And when you had a chance to pick up another match and add another 30 minutes to the 45 you were already going to do, then you've just about doubled your experience that night.
But it was probably never a back-to-back match. There was at least one or two in between, and it was earlier in the card, most likely.
Yeah. You wouldn't, if you knew you had a guy that wasn't going to be there, and you knew one guy was going to the first match, you didn't want to throw him right back in there in the second one. You'd maybe change the order of the card.
Right.
Which fans were accustomed to. That wasn't a big problem.
Yeah.
So you didn't often have to work them back to back. But the great part about it was at the end of the night, and you got in that car and you started home, you had an extra 30 minutes in the ring, man. And it was like, wow, something good happened in there. You learned something in that 30 minutes. And what you were doing is you were working your way to the top so much faster that way. And I remember talking to some guys about it, some young guys, they would go, "Ron, why is it you always jump on that extra match?" And I said, "Because by God, I think I'm going to get to the top before you guys are, And I don't know that really happened for me, but I think it really did, because I started getting in main events before most wrestlers ever dreamed they would be on top. So now I get back to that first thought when you came up with this question, Larry, about did I put on the mask, or did my father put on the mask to take somebody's place? Well, and I'm going to turn this one over to you, Dave. Can you imagine if I came out wearing a mask that anybody wouldn't know who the hell I am?
In disguise. Wow, he's 6'9". He's 275. Yeah, no, it couldn't be Ron Fuller. I seriously doubt it.
Ron Fuller?
Yeah, no, I don't. No, there's another one. Twin Towers.
Thanks, Larry. You gave me a laugh here. I couldn't very well disguise myself as a man.
Well, it would not work for you, but maybe an average average person, I don't know, maybe it would work, but you didn't typically have to go with disguises because somebody didn't show up, I'm assuming.
That's it. That's it.
Okay. All right. There you go. It's another Southeastern Rewinds. Tell me more. The Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller, answered 5 questions about Studcast number 14, which was a lot of fun. You can check it out at tnstud.com, and you can also review it on YouTube. Remember to find Southeastern Rewind on YouTube. Subscribe, ring the bell to get reminders on when the greatest stories in wrestling will be dropped on YouTube. And make sure you tell your friends about Southeastern Rewind. For Ron Fuller, I'm David Summers. We'll be back soon with another Tell Me More.